All right. So this is part two. That is my contact information. So I actually wanted to start this out and kind of frame the presentation I'm going to be doing tonight um, by talking about two different styles of thinking. So these are two different styles of viewing the world, interacting with the world, making sense of the world, and one that I think is maybe a little bit more helpful than the other one. So we have what's called dichotomous thinking, and we have what's called dialectical thinking. So just some definitions. So dichotomous thinking can be defined as black or white, maybe all or nothing. Dichotomous thinking is very rigid. There's a lot of either or in dichotomous thinking, and dichotomous thinking uses the words always and never very frequently. So in dichotomous thinking, one thing has to be true at the expense of the other. And we'll look at a bunch of examples of this in a little bit. But with dichotomous thinking, you either have to be good or bad, or it can only be a good day or a bad day. There's nothing in the middle, or you're a success or you're a failure. There's nothing in the middle. So if you have any failure or anything bad in your day, that means that the whole thing is bad, because with dichotomous thinking, only one thing can be true. One thing has to be true at the expense of the other thing. The another way to kind of look at the world, and I'm going to encourage people to try to start thinking more dialectically. So it's basically just a fancy word for saying two things can be true at the same time. So dialectical thinking, we can think of it as being more gray, more whereas dichotomous is all or nothing. Dialectical is like, it's a partial success. It doesn't have to be a success or a failure. It can be a partial success. It's a lot more flexible. There's a lot more of this sense of like both and. I like it and I don't like it. It was good and it wasn't good. I am a success and I'm a failure. I am a failure, both. Or sometimes, as opposed to always or never. So dialectical thinking kind of allows for both things to be true. So let's look at a lot of specific examples that I'm hoping will kind of bring this a little bit more to life. So last time, 2 weeks ago, we talked about this thing called the just world belief, which is that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And it's a belief that a lot of us have. We get taught, we get told in school, church, family, society at large, we get told that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. Well, how do we want to look at that belief? Because if we're going to look at that belief from the dichotomous thinking side of it, then that means that it's either or. The belief is rigid. The belief has to be as it is. Good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. So the traumatic event has to fit the belief as the belief is. So if we're not going to find any sort of flexibility with the belief, then you're forced to, because this is dichotomous thinking, it's rigid. You either have to make yourself the bad person. You either have to make it where, well, I must be a bad person and that's why this bad thing happened to me. Or the alternative is that you have to throw the whole belief out. So what if we were to try to think a little bit more dialectically? So a little bit more flexibly, a little bit more both and. Well, kind of where we would land with that would be something like both good things and bad things happen to both good and bad people. So good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people, and good things happen to bad people. Like all of that is true. So if we were to think about this a little bit more flexibly, we can make some space for sort of accepting that a traumatic event happened, but without having to either blame yourself or throw the whole belief out and think, well, bad things are just always going to happen to me no matter what I do. So that's an example using that just world belief. But I also want to talk about there's these 5 areas that we talked about last time. These are the 5 areas for anyone who wasn't with us 2 weeks ago. These are the 5 areas of people's lives that tend to be impacted by trauma. And they're safety, trust, power and control, esteem, and intimacy. So this is also coming from cognitive processing therapy. It's an evidence-based treatment for PTSD. I'm trained in it. And then one of the links that I shared with Miranda, there's a national directory for therapists that are trained in CPT. So if this stuff is really speaking to you, then that might be a good treatment to look into. The cool thing about it is that it's 12 sessions, so it's pretty short. And then typically people are like, as far as their PTSD goes, are pretty good to go. So it's not something that is going to take just years and years and years. All right, so let's look at these 5 areas. So if we're going to think about safety, this idea of safety, let's compare what it means to think about safety dichotomously or rigidly, and what it means to think about safety dialectically or flexibly. So after a traumatic event, a lot of people will tend to there's just a lot of rigidity in thinking that happens after trauma. So people will kind of fall into this like, I can't protect myself. People will always try to harm me. So you can see like the word always, the word can't. There's kind of this implied, I can't protect myself from any danger. So it's absolute safety or no safety at all. So if we're going to be dichotomous, if we're going to be rigid about it, that means that you have to either find 100% like perfect safety. And if you can't find that, then there cannot be any safety at all. And so a lot of the time what happens and what I've seen is that people's world and their lives will gradually get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller because they're not able to find that absolute perfect safety. So that's what it looks like if we're going to be dichotomous about it. But let's say we were to maybe think about it a little bit more flexibly, a little bit more both and, then it would be something kind of like these things over on the right. So it would be acknowledging that there is danger in the world and you cannot protect yourself from every possible danger. And acknowledging that you do have some ability to keep yourself safe. Acknowledging that there are some people who are dangerous. So my goal would not be to kind of flip somebody into the opposite and have them be like, yes, the world is completely safe and nobody will ever try to harm me, because that's not true or realistic either. But something more like acknowledging that there are some people out there who are dangerous. That's true. And not everyone or everything is out to harm me in some way. So if it has to be rigid, if it has to be all or nothing, then you can't find that perfect safety. So if we're going to make a little bit more space, it's going to look more like this. So some places are safer than others. So we're again trying to find the gray, trying to find the like partial or something. So there may not be 100% perfect safety, but that doesn't have to mean that there is no safety at all. So dichotomous thinking it's kind of a trap in a way, whereas dialectical thinking kind of allows you to take some risk. So let's look at trust. So after traumatic events, people will often struggle with feeling like, I cannot trust my judgment. I cannot trust my judgment at all. A lot of the time, there's a sense of whatever decision you made in the moment, that wasn't the right decision because the outcome was bad. And we talked last time about this idea of hindsight bias, which is super, super relevant here. But I can't trust my judgment. I can't trust myself at all. I can't trust anyone else. No one can be trusted. So it turns into this thing where it's like, again, rigid, dichotomous, all or nothing. I have to trust everybody or trust nobody. Or I have to trust someone with everything, or I can't trust them with anything. And the way I actually will frame this to like a client that I'm working with is I'll ask them, do you trust me to show up to session, to be on time? Do you trust me to keep your medical information confidential? Hopefully they say yes. and then I'll say, all right, so do you trust me to do dental surgery on you? Would you trust me to do that? And they're like, no, I wouldn't trust you with that. Okay, good. And you shouldn't, because I'm not a dentist and I don't know what I'm doing as far as that goes. So then, am I trustworthy or am I not trustworthy? Well, it depends. It depends on what we're talking about. So this idea of you can trust some people with some things and maybe other people with other things. Maybe you know somebody like that who you would trust. Maybe you know somebody that you would trust to like keep a secret, but you wouldn't trust them to be on time because they're chronically late. Well, again, if we're going to be, this is another way that after trauma, people's lives and their worlds just get smaller and smaller and smaller, because there's this sense of I can't be safe anywhere, and I can't trust anybody, and I can't trust myself. So sometimes I'll even ask people, I'll be like, well, have you ever in your life ever once made a good decision or made a good judgment call? Have you ever done that? Ever one single time? Well, if you've ever made a good decision, you really can't say that you don't make good decisions, like that you don't ever make good decisions. Like that can't be true if you have made good decisions. So probably what's going on is you've made some good decisions and some not so good decisions. That's the beauty of thinking dialectically or thinking flexibly, is it allows you to make bad decisions sometimes and still have good judgment overall, because we're making space for both things. Let's look at power and control. So power and control, how do we get rigid and dichotomous about this? Well, in a traumatic event, by definition, you kind of you didn't have power, you didn't have control, that got taken away. So then people will kind of make sense of that by saying, I must be powerless then. I must be powerless to control myself. I can't control myself. I can't control other people. I mean, it's true that you can't like control other people, but you can have influence with other people sometimes, not all of the time, but not none of the time. So then people will fall into, I am completely powerless. I don't have any influence over myself. I don't have any influence over other people. So again, we're falling into this dichotomy of either I control everything or I control nothing. So this is kind of where, so I know when I talked about the symptoms of PTSD, one of the things that can show up is a lot of just a lot of self-destructive kind of behavior. Well, if you are kind of in this, like, either I control everything or control nothing, then there kind of is this thing about, well, I can't be completely in control, so I might as well just be out of control, because it's all or nothing. So if we're going to think a little bit more flexibly, a little bit more both and, then it's I can't control everything, but I can control some things. I can have some influence some of the time. Or even though I can't get everything I want in a relationship. Because if it's all or nothing, if you can't get everything you want, then you can't get anything. Even though I can't always get everything that I want, I do have the ability to ask for things and to influence others. And we're going to finish. I'm going to be kind of giving you guys like 4 different things, 4 different tools. And so the fourth one is just a really super practical kind of step by step process for asking for things. So dialectical thinking is, and kind of, kind of where I want people to eventually get is this idea that you can control some things. And there are things that you don't control. And both of those things are true. Like one is not true at the expense of the other thing. So now let's look at esteem. And this is really where that kind of all or nothing or rigid just really, really traps people. So if we're going to be dichotomous about esteem, if we're going to be dichotomous about how I see myself and how I see other people, this statement I've heard like this, the I am worthless. I have heard that from, I cannot tell you how many trauma survivors, some version of that. Worthless, or maybe they say broken, or maybe they say damaged. It's maybe a slightly different word. So if here's kind of the thing. If you if we're going to be sort of dichotomous, black and white, or black or white, all or nothing, then I am worthless. Like that is everything about you. That is your whole person, your entire worth, or all people are no good. So with dichotomous thinking, you kind of have to be perfect or worthless. Well, you end up in worthless by default if you're not perfect. So if you're not perfect, if there's something somewhere that's not good, and we have to be super rigid about it, then we're all going to end up on the worthless side of that chart. So if we're going to try to think a little bit more flexibly here, then it's going to look something like the stuff on the right. So much of, I would say, working with people with trauma is kind of coming to this place where you were like, you know what, sometimes bad things happen to good people. Like that's what trauma is. It's a bad thing happening to a good person. And you might say, even if I've made a mistake in the past, I made a mistake is not the same thing as I am a bad person deserving of suffering. Like if we're gonna get all or nothing, those are the only 2 options. You have to be perfect or you're worthless. Or again, acknowledging that some people or some members of a particular group do bad things, and not all whatever are out to hurt me. So you can kind of think of either yourself or other people. If it's dichotomous, it's perfect or worthless. That's it. Those are the only 2 options. With dialectical thinking or more flexible thinking, then you can actually I like to think of it as like we're all mosaics. Like if you think about a mosaic, like a mosaic that's got some good tiles, some neutral tiles, and maybe some bad tiles. But it's all of that stuff. There's good and there's neutral and there's bad. It's not one or the other. And then finally, let's look at intimacy using this framework. So intimacy, and we talked about, so there's this idea of self-intimacy, which is basically being able to soothe yourself and being able to be with yourself without feeling lonely. So if we're going to get dichotomous, then it's going to be, I can't take care of myself at all. Or, but like, because I need help sometimes, that means I'm completely dependent. Like that, that's a dichotomy. Or I can't be close to other people, can't at all. Everyone will hurt me, everyone. So if I can't be connected with everyone, then I can't be connected with anyone. So if we're going to think a little bit more flexibly about intimacy, whether it's intimacy with yourself or intimacy with other people, then we're going to try to look at this with a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more gray. So something like, it may be hard at first, and I can develop skills for taking care of myself. I can do things that I enjoy doing. I can still be close to people, but I may not want to be intimate with everyone I meet. Or I can be connected with some people and not with others. So I know that this is broad. This, dichotomous versus dialectical thinking it's not like a I don't want to say it's not a practical tool, but it's not like a do this, do this, do this kind of thing. It's more of a just, here's a different way to try to make sense of things. But I want to really encourage you guys to just to try to find, where can we put the and? Where can two things be true at once? Where can it be this and this, not this or this? Okay, so that's, oh, that went too far. So that's tool number one, just kind of a broad, oh, and I think just real quick, just to mention in the description for this, one of the things that was mentioned was, was this idea of acceptance and change. I know there was some allusion to that in the description. So I really like to think of just the process of therapy, maybe even just the process of healing, as kind of being this, we're holding both acceptance and change. So it's actually really important to both accept yourself where you are, as you are, and try to change. That doesn't have to be either or. Like that doesn't have to be, well, if I accept myself, that means I can't change. Or if I try to change, that means I don't accept myself. I think it can be both. I think it can be, and I also think of my role as a therapist being really similar, that I am simultaneously tasked with accepting somebody as they are and helping them make changes. So that's that. That's dialectical thinking versus dichotomous thinking. And you'll actually probably start to see like dichotomous or rigid thinking everywhere you look. Like it's all over the place. And it's not always bad. So that's number one. The second tool or concept that I want to introduce you guys to is, I'm going to introduce it talking about this. And I distilled this slide down from like a whole like hour-long presentation that I went to, a training that I went to that was talking about this stuff. So I tried to pick out like kind of what I thought would be relevant or would like connect to what I'm trying to say. So we're going to nerd out a little bit for a minute on some science. But you are born with a certain number of genes. Like we're all born with a certain number of genes, but we now know that that's not the whole story. So your environment can have an impact on what genes are turned on and what genes are turned off. So one of the things that this is kind of this whole idea of what's called epigenetics. So one thing that we know is that people who have experienced trauma not only have certainly higher incidences of things, I mean, PTSD, certainly higher incidences of things like depression and anxiety and other psychiatric illnesses, but also just all kinds of other medical conditions. So we think that the way that trauma impacts your body is that it is kind of like screwing around with, for lack of a better way to describe it, parts of your genome that would otherwise be preventing inflammation. So you see a lot of inflammation related stuff in people that have experienced trauma. Well, one of the things that apparently has an impact on these changes to what genes get expressed and what genes turn on and what genes turn off is the length of our telomeres. So telomeres are, you kind of think of them like that plastic cap on the end of your shoelaces. So they're basically caps at the end of our DNA that like keep it intact. So really oversimplified, but as this process degrades, cells get sick and they die. So you want like long telomeres. Well, two things that can make them shorter are aging and stress. So then the question is, okay, so aging and stress, telomeres get shorter, got it. Can we make them longer? Can we undo that damage? So yes, you can make your telomeres longer there's an enzyme called telomerase. So all of this to say, how do you do it? How do you get to like a good level of telomerase? Well, you practice being aware of what's happening as it happens. So in other words, you do mindfulness. Oh, there we go. Why are my slides going rogue? Okay. You practice mindfulness. So this is the second tool that I'm going to talk to you guys about. So this is a definition. And then I have slides for each of these bullet points that we're going to talk through. So I'm using John Kabat-Zinn. It's kind of a big heavy hitter in the mindfulness world. So according to him, mindfulness is this. Mindfulness is the awareness that emerges through paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally, to the unfolding of experience, moment to moment, plus acceptance. So this is paying attention to what's happening as it's happening. So let's start with the first part. So mindfulness is the awareness that emerges. What does that mean? How do we define that? You can kind of think of it as like waking up from automatic pilot. So have you ever been, and these are all things that I have done. That's where I got these things, is I thought of stuff that I've done. So lost in your thoughts that you miss an exit that you've taken 100 times, or opened an ice cream sandwich, tossed the sandwich in the trash and tried to eat the paper, or put the remote control in the fridge and then been like, why is that in here? Or gone through a red light from a stop. So mindfulness is about, so in all of those situations where I did those things, I wasn't being mindful. I was on automatic pilot. I wasn't paying attention to what was happening as it was happening. So mindfulness is first about just becoming clearly aware of what's really going on. Once you're able to accurately perceive what's going on, you take the proper exit, you get to enjoy the ice cream sandwich and not the paper. You put the remote control where it goes, like probably on the coffee table, and you don't plow through the red light. So that's what the awareness that emerges. It's waking up from automatic pilot and kind of doing like thinking about what you're doing as you're doing it. So it's the awareness that emerges through paying attention. So mindfulness is sort of like training your attentional control. So it's noticing your mind wandering and bringing it back, and noticing it wandering again and bringing it back, and noticing it wandering again and bringing it back. So this repetition makes this easier, makes this stronger. There's a saying in the neuroscience world, and some of you guys have probably heard it, that neurons that fire together wire together. So the more times that you practice something, the easier it gets. Now, we're not going to be dichotomous here. So this doesn't mean that you have to, not only does it not mean that you have to pay attention all the time, you can't pay attention all the time. Like, that is not humanly possible. And I'm just going to throw this in here. I don't have a ton of information. I didn't get much into this, but when you are experiencing something really traumatic, actually, in a lot of ways, it's more functional to not be paying attention to what's going on, to not be mindful. So it doesn't mean that you have to always be 100% aware of every single, and it's not possible to do that anyway. So the awareness that emerges through paying attention, which is just bringing your mind back to whatever it is you're doing on purpose. Is that yeah, okay. Okay. Sorry, guys. On purpose. So mindfulness it's intentional. It's knowing why you're doing what you're doing. You're deciding where you want to place your attention. So let's say that at some point during this thing tonight, you get distracted by your thoughts and you miss some of what I said. So I'm not going to say, no, you should pay attention to me. What I will ask is if you are paying attention to the other thoughts on purpose. So maybe you really do have like a crisis to attend to. And if that's the case, step away and deal with it. So if if you lose focus, you're not listening to what I'm saying, I'm not going to say you must focus on me. But what's more likely happening is that you want to be listening to what I'm saying, and you just keep thinking about stuff that you don't really want to be thinking about right now. So that's what it is to pay attention on purpose. It's sort of like knowing why you're doing what you're doing. And this is something that takes a lot of practice. So on purpose, in the present moment. So just to review, it's the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose in the present moment. Because nothing actually really exists but the present moment that we're in. So we, a lot of the time, are either thinking or living in the past or the future. And the past is really only in your memory. It's not here, it exists in your memory. And the future exists only in your thinking. And I would say that if you're feeling really anxious at any given moment, you're probably in the future. You're probably not here in the present. You're probably somewhere in the future if you're anxious. Like if you're anxious right now, assuming nothing, like no crisis is going on around you. If you're anxious right now, you are probably in the future. And if you are sad or resentful or angry, again, you're probably in the past. You're probably not in the present. I certainly hope that like nothing that I'm talking about is making people feel really sad or really angry or really resentful. But that's probably what's going on. Like a lot of our distress is not whatever's happening right in front of us. So mindfulness is about being in the present moment and doing all of this non-judgmentally. So talk just a minute about what it is, like what judgment, what a judgment is. What does it mean to make a judgment? Well, we all make judgments. We go through the day, we make judgments all day long. So judgments can be stuff like this is helpful, this is harmful, or this is good for me, this is not good for me, or how things are now compared to how I want them to be. I mean, those are judgments. Like if I ask you, did you like the movie that you watched last night? That's a judgment. If I ask you, what kind of food do you want tomorrow? That's a judgment. So judgments are not always bad, but where judgments can start to get into problems is when it becomes this constant, just habitual tendency to judge the moment that you're in. This shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't be this way. I should be different. This should be different. This constant habitual tendency to judge the moment, to judge yourself, or to compare, like comparing yourself to other people. That's a judgment. Comparing this moment with some other moment. That's a judgment. It's not, it's not always a harmful judgment, but those are judgments. So like I'll just give you guys, let me try to think of a quick example. Like a judgment would be, I'm a terrible friend. That's a judgment. If we were going to try to be more mindful about whatever it is, I would ask somebody to say maybe, oh, I let my friend down and they're going to be upset with me. Again, we're getting out of this sort of rigid, dialectical or dichotomous kind of thinking. So dichotomous is I'm a terrible friend. I disappointed somebody. I am a terrible friend, because it's all or nothing. Well, how much better does it feel to just say, I let my friend down and they're going to be upset with me? It's true. You're not sugarcoating anything. And I would argue that that's actually a much more accurate way of looking at whatever the situation is. And then, hold on a second. Okay, thought that skipped the slide. So hold on, I'm just going to review this. So the awareness that emerges through paying attention in a particular way. Oh, that skipped that slide. Okay, I thought that sounded. So let me just talk about this real quick. So how do we pay attention? You pay attention in this particular way. You pay attention with an attitude or with a stance of interest, curiosity, and kindness. Whatever the experience is, even if the experience is uncomfortable. So instead of trying to control your thoughts, because you can't, I don't think you can. I don't think you can have total control over your thoughts. Mindfulness is really about how do you have a kinder response to your own thoughts. So this might be thoughts about being a terrible person are here instead of I'm a terrible person, or anxiety is present right now. And then on purpose. So if you're distracted, you're being distracted on purpose. You're making a conscious decision to be distracted. In the present moment, on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally, to the unfolding of your experience. So mindfulness is not always about being like peaceful and still. Mindfulness is really just about being present. and being present for the fun moments and present for the challenging moments. I mean, you guys can probably think of times, like things that you've done that you regret not being present for, like things that could have been really fun, but you spent the whole time worrying about when it was going to end, or worrying about whether you deserved this, or worrying about whether this is what you should be doing, or thinking about something else that has nothing to do with the present moment. Like, you can probably think of things that you enjoyed less because you weren't present for them. So mindfulness is about being present for the fun moments and being present for the challenging moments. So it's keeping your attention to the moment that you're in. Doesn't, like, no matter what happened in the past or what could happen later, keeping your attention to the moment that you're actually in. And then plus acceptance. So I accept that. To say that you accept something doesn't imply being okay with whatever it is. So acceptance, and this is another, like, people will think, well, if I accept it, that means I like it. What if we thought flexibly or dialectically about acceptance and said, it is possible, what if you could accept it and dislike it? It's like, I accept that this happened. Like, I acknowledge that this is the reality, and I hate it. Accepting it does not have to mean liking it, approving of it, thinking it's good. And acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It actually doesn't mean giving up. It's accepting the reality of whatever this moment is, and then trying to figure out, how do I want to change it? What do I want to change in the next moment? So that's kind of an intro. I mean, mindfulness is broad. Mindfulness is, I mean, my God, we could do a whole, like, multi-week thing just about mindfulness. But it's really just about being present for your life. It's kind of the opposite of being checked out, of being dissociated. And it's also one of those things that can, we talked about those caps at the end of your DNA, those telomeres. That's how you kind of start to undo the damage that stress has done on someone's brain, on someone's body. Essentially paying attention to what's happening as it's happening, which is mindfulness. Okay. So that's the second thing I want to talk to you guys about, or introduce to you guys, is this idea of mindfulness. So now I want to talk about, this is probably my favorite thing that we're going to talk about tonight, which is this idea of self-compassion. So self-compassion was designed to be kind of an alternative to self-esteem. Self-compassion is useful because it offers you all the benefits of self-esteem, but without the pitfalls of self-esteem. So what's the problem with self-esteem? Well, self-esteem really tends to be contingent on success, and it's based on a judgment of your worth. So self-esteem kind of gets into this, like, I have to be blank to have self-esteem. I have to be successful to have self-esteem. And then if we throw in some, like, rigid dichotomous thinking on top of that, then it's, well, I have to be successful to have self-esteem, and I can't be successful because I'm not always successful all the time. So therefore I'm a failure, therefore I cannot have any self-esteem. And the other problem with it is that sometimes with trying to, like, pursue good self-esteem, we find our worth at the expense of others. So, in other words, we have to compare ourselves to other people, which is a judgment. Like, how good am I compared to this other person? I have to make a judgment of myself, and I have to make a judgment of that other person. So, to have high self esteem, we tend to chase after this idea of being special. And to be special, you have to be different. And not only that, you have to be better. You have to be different in a way that's better. So, this also has the problem of it disconnecting you from other people. Like, if I have to be different, if I have to focus on how I'm different from other people, that starts to set people up for a lot of loneliness, a lot of isolation, a lot of feeling disconnected from other people. So, self compassion provides a more stable sense of self worth because it's not based on success, it's not based on a judgment of your worth. Self compassion doesn't really care how you stack up against other people. Self compassion is not about I'm different and I'm better. Self compassion is about I'm the same. I'm the same as you. I'm the same as other people. So the reason it's more stable is that it rests on the assumption that you're already worthy versus worth being something that you have to pursue, that you have to earn, that you have to get to. So self compassion is built on the assumption that people are just worthy just because they are, because they're humans. So if we're going to think about what it means to have compassion for yourself, it helps to think about what it means to have compassion for someone else. And you guys all know what that feels like. Like, if I ask you, have you ever have felt compassion? Can you kind of, have a felt sense of what that's like? You know, but I like to define it. So what's actually happening when you are feeling compassion for another living thing? Well, you first have to notice that that other living thing is suffering. You have to see them, you have to see that they are suffering. And then you have to feel an urge to respond. So it's like, I see you suffering, and I feel pulled to respond to your suffering. And then finally, you also have to recognize for it to be compassion, you recognize that their suffering could be your suffering. Otherwise, it's pity. This is the difference between compassion and pity. If I'm going to feel compassion for somebody else, I'm going to acknowledge that what they're going through could just as easily be my situation or someone that I love, that it could have happened to anybody. That's compassion. Compassion is this could have happened to anybody. Pity, on the other hand, is, oh my God, you poor thing, that would never happen to me. That's pity. So you see how pity is disconnecting and compassion is connecting. Compassion is, this thing that happened to you could have happened to me, could have happened to people I know, could have happened to anybody. So if you're going to have compassion for yourself, you have to first notice that you're suffering. You have to acknowledge that you're suffering. You then have to, that's mindfulness. Mindfulness is also being aware that you are really hungry and you need to eat something, or that you are really sleepy and you need to go to bed, or that you are really lonely and you need to reach out to somebody. Like, this is where, like, being mindful for the good moments and the not so good moments. Because then if you're mindful during the not so good moments, then you can respond to whatever it is you're needing rather than just powering through. So acknowledging that you're suffering and feeling moved to respond to your own suffering. And then finally, and this is what I really like about self-compassion, you then think about feeling a connection with other people who have also suffered. Otherwise, it's self-pity. So self-pity is isolating, it's disconnecting, it's I am over here, I am broken, I am suffering, I am this, I am messed up, and other people aren't. I'm special, in other words. Self-compassion is acknowledging that this happens to other people. You feel a connection with other people who've also suffered. So self-compassion has three components. The first being mindfulness. So it's why I wanted to talk about mindfulness and then shift into talking about self-compassion. So what is mindfulness in this context? It's being aware that you're suffering and being non-judgmental. So it's not, I shouldn't be struggling. I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't be so sad. I shouldn't be so angry. I should just get over it. I should be able to handle it. Mindfulness in the context of self-compassion is a non-judgmental, it's, I'm suffering. I'm struggling right now. God, this is really hard. God, I'm having a really hard time with this. And not making any sort of a judgment about whether you should or shouldn't be having a hard time about it. Just acknowledging, I'm really struggling right now. So that's the first part of it. It's being aware. It's being aware that you're suffering. And then the second component of it is self-kindness. So this is that thing, and if you've done any sort of therapy, you've probably been told this by a therapist. And I'm going to get into here in a minute, kind of talking about just bringing a little bit more brain science into it. But the idea is that if you wouldn't say it to a loved one, then you don't say it to yourself. And I would say that holding yourself to it, and I see this, like, my God, I see this all the time, that people would never, ever, ever, ever say to another person that they should just get over it, that they should have been able to handle it better. Like, people can so easily see, oh yeah, if this was my best friend, I would never tell them this, but we hold ourselves to a different standard than other people. And I would describe that as a really twisted it's a form of specialness. So we're kind of back to that idea of, I have to be, to feel good about myself, I have to be special. Well, how am I going to be special? I have to be different and I have to be better. Well, holding yourself to this different standard is, I guess it is a form of being different and being better. I would say that it's a pretty twisted form of specialness. So you're non-judgmentally aware, yeah, I'm suffering right now. And then you are responding to that suffering in the same way that you would respond to it if it was somebody else that you cared about. And then the third component of it is what's called common humanity. So rather than feeling alone and unique in your suffering, think about your struggle, whatever it is, thinking about it as part of a shared human experience. Otherwise, it's self-pity. So self-pity is like, I'm all alone. I'm all alone in my suffering. Self-compassion is thinking about other people, like other people struggle with this, other people feel this way. So then the question becomes, okay, so we've talked about what are the benefits of self-compassion, how do you do it? So then this kind of brings up the question of why then are we all so self-critical? Well, this is where we're going to briefly talk a little bit about some history. And I have notes. I didn't want to type them all out on this thing. So let me just, if you guys will bear with me for a second. I'm going to make that, here we go. So why are we all so self-critical then? Why is this such a huge problem? Well, most of us get the message that self-criticism is motivating and that it is necessary for success or to be good people. So I did a little bit. So this is kind of the research that I did when I was putting this, not for this present, but this self-compassion material that I put together for like a group that I did. So I'm going to share with you guys just some of like the research that I did. So there's this thing called the Protestant work ethic, and maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, but it has, whether you've heard of it or not, it influences your life. Certainly, if you live in the United States, I don't think we had any international people. I know we had some people from, like, I think Australia last time, but Australia is just as influenced as we are, I would say. So if you live in the United States, your life has been influenced by this thing called the Protestant work ethic, significant influence on US culture. So it's a term that was originally coined in the year 1904 by a man named Max Weber, who wrote a book called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And this book emphasizes diligence, discipline, and frugality. So Weber made the observation that Protestant religions and capitalism tend to flourish in the same parts of the world. So if you live in a part of the world where capitalism is kind of like the dominant culture or economic system, you are influenced by this. Another thing that's relevant here is Calvinist doctrine. I know y'all are thinking, like, who the hell is a Calvinist anymore? But Calvinist doctrine, I'll talk more about that in a minute, really emphasizes asceticism, which is kind of this idea of like depriving yourself, and work as the source of somebody's value. That's really influential here too. So the Protestant work ethic is also called the Puritan work ethic. And the Puritans followed Calvinist doctrine. So to the Puritans, people are inherently sinful. That was their belief. A lot of, kind of, I would say still, it's not framed as Calvinist doctrine, but we get this. A person is inherently sinful and they can only become good through this harsh and inflexible strictness. So hard work was a religious imperative, and a person was expected to constantly subject themselves to self-examination and self-discipline. Nobody is talking anymore about being Puritan or being Calvinist that I know of. But tell me that does not sound like the culture that we all grew up in. So that's my opinion as to why are we all so self-critical? Well, it's our culture. So now let me go back to my slides here. All right, I'll make this big again. So, okay, so we talked about where that comes from and why we do it. But what is actually going on in your brain when you're being really self-critical? Well, your threat system is being activated. If you are, criticism's a threat. Like if somebody were to come at you being very critical, yelling at you, putting you down, calling you names, telling you that you're terrible. If somebody were to come at you like that, you would go into threat. So what does that mean? Your threat system is activated. Well, two parts of your brain, the reptilian brain and the limbic brain, which is basically your reflexes and your emotions, more or less, or fight, flight, freeze. So the parts of your brain that are a little bit more primitive, those parts get really activated. So the reptilian brain or the brain stem which is just your most basic, like breathing, heart rate, reflexes, basic stuff. And then the limbic brain is kind of like I don't know, roughly the middle of the brain. That's your emotions. So you've got reflexes and you've got emotion, but what you don't have is the frontal part of your brain. So these are your executive functions. This is stuff like planning, organizing, anticipating consequences, logic, reasoning, all of that kind of stuff. So you've got reflexes and you've got emotions, but you don't have a lot of like higher reasoning. So you are putting yourself into a state of threat. And when people are in a state of threat, they don't function as well. They don't make it, you don't perform as well. Like you really don't perform as well if you are activating your threat system. So self-compassion, on the other hand, kind of works with humans being mammals. So it activates something called the mammalian caregiving system. So most like mammal babies are really needy, like compared to other species. No, are mammals a species, or is they are they a like genus, or anyway? So mammal babies are needy. Other babies, other types of animals don't need as much care when they're very young. But mammals are different. We need a lot of care. We need a lot of attention before we're able to go off on our own. So because of that need, essentially this like system developed to keep the mother and the baby close together. So humans are wired, mammals really, to respond to touch and warmth and soft vocalizations. It's the kind of things people naturally do around a baby. That's the mammalian giving system. If somebody comes to you and they're screaming and yelling at you and they're hurling insults and they're insulting you, you're going to go into threat. You're going to get scared. You're going to go into threat, and you're basically going to lose like a part of your brain that you really want to be working in that moment. You're going to lose that. If somebody comes to you and they do like soothing touch and they're warm and they use soft vocalizations, you're going to feel safer. You're going to feel calmer. You're going to feel safer. I mean, we feel safe, humans, we feel safe when people are nice to us, and we feel unsafe when people are mean to us. So this also, part of this mammalian caregiving system is that it releases oxytocin, endorphins. So when you are being kind to yourself, you're putting yourself in a state of safety. And when we're in safety, so even if you're very like driven and focused and like you want to do a good job, because a lot of time that people that are self-critical or like perfectionists, you're actually going to do a better job if you feel safe. Like if you feel safe, you have your whole brain. If you feel threatened, you don't have your whole brain. You have the more primitive parts of your brain. You don't have the higher parts of your brain. So there really is something to like being kind to yourself that will actually put you in a better position to handle things better. So how do you do self-compassion in the moment? How do you take a self-compassion break? So when you encounter, there's another thing that you can use. When you encounter a situation that would normally prompt you to berate yourself, try to do this instead. So say these 3 things to yourself. So say to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. That's mindfulness. Or you could say, this hurts, or ouch, or this is really hard. Just something acknowledging that you're struggling. This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is part of life, common humanity. Other people feel this way. I'm not alone. We all struggle. If you like that language better, but this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. It can be helpful too, and I do this, to put your hand on your chest and just put a little bit of, not a ton of pressure, but a little bit of pressure. There's something soothing about that. So placing your hand on your chest, because that's touch and warmth, and then you're doing the soothing vocalizations. And then may I be kind to myself. Or may I learn to accept myself as I am? May I be patient? May I be at peace? So this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is part of life. May I be kind to myself? And then go about your day, go back to whatever it is you were doing. This doesn't take long, but it'll put you in a better, it'll feel better. And it'll put you in a better position to function the way that you want to be functioning. Okay. So we are going to wrap this up. We've got about 15 minutes left. We are going to spend the rest of the time. So we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit. And I'm going to give you guys a tool for asking for things. So this is going to be much more practical, more down to earth, asking for what you want. So this is straight from, I put this from something called the DBT Skills Training Manual, or dialectical behavior therapy. So we're just talking about dialectics earlier. So this is a skill for if you want to obtain some kind of an objective or a goal. So stand up for your rights, make a request, refuse a request. Then you can think about using what's called Dear Man. And we're going to talk through each of these. But what a lot of people will do is they'll actually write yourself out like a little script, kind of following this before you go into whatever the conversation is. But essentially, you are describing the situation, expressing what you feel, asking for whatever it is you want, and reinforce why you're asking for it. So that's really, the DEAR is really like, what do you do? And then the MAN is sort of like, how do you do it? So then we're going to talk about stay mindful. So there's mindfulness again. So you want to stay mindful, appear confident, and finally negotiate. So let's talk through each of these. So the first part of this is just to describe the current situation. So I think of this as, this is what's going on. So try to stick to facts and describe what it is you're reacting to. So I'm going to give an example of a way this conversation could go. So in this case, the situation is, you told me you would be home by dinner, but you didn't get here until 11. So that's it. Just stating that's true. The person said they'd be home by dinner. They didn't get here till 11. That's sticking to facts. You're not getting into, why don't you ever listen to me? Why do you hate me? Why are you ignoring me? You're not getting into any of that. You're just stating, this is what happened. You said you'd be home by dinner. You didn't get here until 11. This is what's going on. Then, this is how I feel about it. That's the next part of it. So expressing your feelings and your opinions about the situation. So don't assume the other person knows how you feel. This is a big thing in relationships, is assuming, and any kind of romantic, friendship, coworkers, any of that, is assuming that the other person knows how we feel. Don't assume that they know how you feel. So then in this example that we're using, this person would say, when you come home so late, I start worrying about you. And you want to think about using phrases like I want instead of you should. Like should is a really heavy, judgmental word, and it tends to put people on the defensive. I get on the defensive if I hear that. Most of us do. So you, why are my slides not, okay. So this is what's going on. You told me you would be home by dinner, but you didn't get here until 11. This is how I feel about it. When you come home so late, I start worrying about you. This is what I want. So assert yourself by asking for what you want or saying no clearly. So don't assume other people are going to figure out what you want. So don't assume they can read your mind. Don't assume they know how you feel. Don't assume they know what you want. So, and make sure you make a request. This is the other kind of interesting thing, is people will never actually get to the part where they ask for the thing that they want. So in this situation, it's, I would really like it if you would call me when you were going to be late. That's asking for that. This is what I want. And then finally, this is why I want it. So explain the positive effects of getting what you're asking for, and or clarify the negative consequences of not getting what you want. So in this situation, this person is saying, I would be so relieved and a lot easier to live with if you do that. And then remember to reward the desired behavior. So if this person does call the next time, to say like, oh, thank you so much for doing that. So just to recap, you told me you would be home by dinner, but you didn't get home until 11. When you come home so late, I start worrying about you. I would really like it if you would call me when you're going to be late. I would be so relieved and a lot easier to live with if you do that. That's basically it. That's asking for something. So these other things are just pieces to consider in terms of how you're asking. So stay mindful. So mindfulness is like threaded into everything. So keep focused on your goal. Maintain your position. Don't get distracted. Don't get off the topic. So 2 things to think about depending on what the situation is. One, there's this thing called broken record, which, God, I have to wonder at what point, like, people are not going to know what records are, and this like phrase is not going to make any sense. But it's kind of like, just you keep asking or saying no. You kind of just keep asking, not in a way that's abrasive, but you say, I would still like a call. I would still like a call. Or what would you like me to do right now? Or how can I help you right now? Or no, I'm not going to do that. Just know that depending on the situation, you might have to like say it over and over again. Like you may have to say it multiple times. Other thing to think about, this may or may not be relevant, but sometimes it is, it's to ignore attacks. So if the other person gets very attacking or threatening or tries to change the subject, just keep making your point. Don't respond to the attacks. Don't respond to the distractions. So like if this person's like, I would like a call, and the other person says, I don't know what, something that's not relevant to the situation, like, yeah, well, you did this thing last week and that pissed me off. I would still like a call. You just keep making your point. So stay mindful, knowing why you're doing what you're doing, staying focused on whatever the task at hand is. The next thing is appear confident. So the task is to appear confident. The task is not wait until you feel confident and then make the request. The task isn't even be confident, it's appear confident. So you can appear confident even if you don't actually feel confident. So this is stuff like, acting as if your needs matter, acting as if what you're asking for matters. So making eye contact, try not to get into this like, well, I don't know, if it's too much trouble, you don't have to do it. It's fine, really. Like you can say no, it's fine. You just say, I would like this thing. And that's kind of it. So acting as if what you are asking for matters. Because it does. if you know, if it didn't matter, you wouldn't be asking for it. And then finally, the last piece of this is negotiate. So this is also where the flexibility starts to come in. So be willing to give to get. So you can offer solutions, you can ask for solutions, or you can reduce your request. So maybe it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Maybe you are trying to get 5 days off and you can't get 5 days off. So then some people will be like, I guess I can't get any time off. Ask for 3 days, ask for 2 days, like ask for something. There's a lot of space in between 0 days and 5 days. Or say no, but offer to do something else. Offer to solve the problem another way. Try to focus on what's going to work. You can sort of turn the tables. So in other words, if someone's coming to you for something, this can also be really useful if you are a person who has a hard time saying no, who tends to take on too much, to say, I can't do that, but I can do this other thing. Or I can't do this, but what do you think we should do? Ask for other solutions. So the example from the earlier example is maybe this other person's like, I don't want to call you. I don't want to call. I hate making phone calls. I don't know. So then you would say, what do you think we should do? I just can't stop worrying about you, or I'm not willing to. So it might be asking for a text instead of a phone call in the case of this, saying like, okay, if you don't want to make a phone call, can you just send me a quick text? Like, is that workable? So it doesn't have to be, I didn't get what I wanted, so I get nothing. Or I have to say no to this person, and that means I'm saying no to everything. Again, there can be gray, fluidity, flexibility, both and rather than either or. And then I think that's everything. Yeah, that is what I got. So yeah, I can answer any questions that people have in the 4 minutes that let me hold on. Let me stop sharing my screen.
There we go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
There
okay, so much information. I know
a
lot of folks are probably in that information overload phase.
Yeah.
If you have any quick questions, please pop them in the chat. And then Jessica put her contact information in that first slide. So I'll make sure that gets emailed out to everybody as well. Again, I'll have the recording up tomorrow. Any quick questions? That was a lot of things. That everything that you just said reminded me of something that happened to me in my sheltering experience, where I went, oh yeah, I wish I'd had some of these skills, or I wish I'd had some of these thoughts. So I hope some other folks were making these kinds of connections. Okay, so since I have everybody here, unless there's another question in the chat, again, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. Our whole goal is to make sure that training and behavior support are accessible to folks. So we do offer private training and classes here in the Austin area. We just put out, just in case you have folks who need it, even if you're not in the Austin area, we have emergency behavior consults posted. So they're usually available within 24 to 48 hours, and that's to speak to a certified behavior consultant. Again, we may not be able to work with folks long-term, but at least if you have somebody that is struggling with a dog in the home, something is going on and they need to talk to someone fast, that is something that's available on our website that we just launched. So fun news for you. Thank you so much to everybody for coming out and supporting your own mental health, and please pass this along to others. Again, the recording will be up tomorrow, as well as the part 1. And if there are particular things that you have questions about, again, we do have a referral list. There are the resources about providers, across the country or across the world that are trained in things like CBT. And if there's anything that you need, any requests you have from us for future webinars, things like that, please let us know. Anything else you want to say on your end, Jessica?
No, just yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being willing
I
to
hope this
be
was
roped
useful.
into this crazy world. I know that there's a lot going on, so we really appreciate you taking this time, and so glad to get some expert advice in there. So awesome. Thank you so much for
All right.
everyone. Enjoy your rest of your evening, and we'll see you next
Yeah.
time. Bye.
Bye, y'all.